Welcome to our MJA Inc. Investigations podcast. The series Deep into the Woods, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. This is episode 16, The Palatine 3. My name is Mark, and I am your host for tonight's podcast. Missing 39-year-old white female Stephanie Ann Lung vanished without a trace on October 25, 1977 from Palatine, Illinois, located in Cook County. Stephanie was last seen after leaving a neighbor's house to meet a carpet installer at her home in Palatine on October 25, 1977. The carpet installers told investigators that she never showed up at home and their knocks went unanswered. Later that day, her 15-year-old daughter reported her missing. Stephanie's blue station wagon was found 4 days later abandoned at the O'Hare Airport. A small amount of blood in the car was determined at the time to be the same type as Stephanie's. Stephanie had recently filed for divorce from her husband, Edward Lung. Mr. Lung was arrested in 1992 and charged with her murder. He was convicted in 1994, but has never told investigators where he disposed of the body. Trial testimony indicated that Edward Lung planned his wife's murder and had dug her grave several days prior to her disappearance. His girlfriend at the time testified that she helped place Stephanie's car at the O'Hare Airport. She also testified that Lung told her he had ambushed Stephanie in her home, stabbed her, and then drove to Lake County, Illinois, and buried her. She stated that he returned to the gravesite at a later time and mutilated her body so that if found, it would not be identified. One of Edward Lung's nephews claimed that Lung offered him $50,000 to kill Stephanie. Stephanie is believed to be buried in Lake County, Illinois. She left behind 4 daughters. Lung is now at the Menard Correctional Center and will not be eligible for release until September of 2026, when he'll be nearly 92 years old. Missing 28-year-old white female Catherine Ann Runte on May 22, 1979. Runte vanished without a trace from Palatine, Illinois, located in Cook County. Catherine had an emotional and physical fight with her husband on May 22, 1979. She left the house on foot and has not been seen or heard from since. The husband claimed that Catherine had mental problems and was afraid of being hospitalized. He told police she walked out of the house taking only a purse containing credit cards, a small amount of cash, and leaving her car behind. He reported her missing 3 days later after his own search for her was fruitless. A private investigator he hired was also unable to learn what happened to her. Runte lived in Spinnaker Cove subdivision in Palatine, Illinois. Relatives said at the time that she had been looking forward to her mother's upcoming second marriage and had lifelong friends in the area. Her co-workers said she seemed happy with her part-time job as a interior designer for a Barrington firm. 8 months before she disappeared, a man and woman armed with pistols forced their way into her home and handcuffed her to a beam in the basement. For several hours, they ransacked the house and took more than $5,000 worth of jewelry and furnishings. Runte's stepdaughter, one of two who lived at home, found her when she returned home from high school. Police are uncertain if the home invasion has any relation to her disappearance. Several months after Catherine disappeared, a telephone company serviceman discovered a wiretap on her mother's home phone in Carpentersville. No one knows who placed the wiretap or whether it could be related. None of her credit cards Mrs. Runte has been used. Area cab companies told police she was not picked up the night she disappeared. Her family told police that Mrs. Runte had argued previously with her husband during their 6 years of marriage and that she left for periods of a couple of hours to cool off. On one occasion, she was gone for several days but informed her family of her whereabouts. Missing: 24-year-old white female Laura Ann Johnson vanished without a trace. Laura Ann Johnson went missing on May 5, 1990 from Palatine, Illinois, located in Cook County. Johnson was last seen leaving a bar in Palatine, Illinois called the Hobnob on May 5, 1990. Johnson was accompanied by an unidentified white male witnesses said she had met that evening. He spoke with a southern accent and claimed to be a truck driver from Memphis, Tennessee. The man had dark hair and a mustache. He was in his early to mid-20s and was around 5 feet 10 inches tall. Around 4 a.m., Johnson left the lounge with the truck driver. A witness told police he saw them walk to the rear of the lot and out of his view. He never saw them get into a vehicle. No clues indicate that Johnson ran away to start a new life, and she left behind 2 children. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, our first guest on tonight's podcast will be Dan. Welcome back to our MJA podcast. We here at MJA would like to give a shout out to the Corbin Connection on YouTube. Mr. Corbin is a very funny guy with his 3 alter egos. Once again, that's the Corbin Connection on YouTube. Check it out. Now back to our podcast. This is episode 16, part 1, labeled The Palatine 3 Women Missing from Palatine, Illinois. We are on the line with Dan. Welcome, Dan, to our podcast, and how are you tonight?
Pretty good. Finally starting to cool off a little bit.
Well, it seems to me that we have three husbands who don't believe in getting a divorce. Dan, when you read about cases like this, what is your first thought?
My first thought, never get married.
That'll just take care of everything, huh?
Yeah.
And why do you think men choose to kill their wives instead of getting a divorce?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. Financial would be the one that I think most people think of. But I also think it just goes back to the oldest reason there is. When the Catholic Church first came up with the concept of divorce, it's that many people don't want to live with the shame of having to admit they couldn't make it work, or they're faulted, or they're not good enough for their spouse. So at the end of the day, they'd rather control them than let them go. Oh. And I think that's what inevitably leads to all these spousal homicides. They'd rather, if they can't love me, they can't love anyone. And then, obviously, that's how we end up.
Okay, Stephanie Ann Lung, 39 years old, went missing on October 25th, 1977, who was married to Ed Lung. In Mr. Lung's case, he was convicted of murdering his wife. Why do you think he won't give up the location of his dead wife's remains?
It could be just to create reasonable doubt in the minds of, anybody looking over any of his appeals. Once you admit where that body is, you've admitted that you've committed murder, and a lot of your appeal options, I don't know what his currently are. I can't speak to them as I haven't talked to his lawyer. But a lot of people feel like once they give up the location of those remains, that any opportunity they had at freedom is gone. Another reason could be they simply don't remember where they put the body. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, he murdered 50 people. And a lot of people think, serial killers and that have a perfect memory for where they put every victim. But at the end of the day, when it came down to the police interrogation, he forgot where he put a lot of those bodies. So, it could be any one of those two reasons. Or because he's trying to shield his daughters. And he feels like if he tells them, maybe they'll see him as less in their eyes. I can't speak for them or him, but that's what I would think.
And is there something in his personality that would give us some insight on this matter?
Well, he's obviously very controlling, You see, his wife disappears after their argument. They find her car at the airport. A lot of people like this, they watch everything their spouse does. I've seen it in my personal life, and I'm sure you have too, where they monitor every dime their spouse spends, every second of every minute. They know where they are. They know who they're with. If they're not exactly where they say they are, when they say they are, there's a big to-do. So, you often see that. Again, it goes back to having those controlling personality and not wanting to let go. Some people just go a lot more extreme with it than others.
And wouldn't you think he would give up the location of the body to make a deal on getting an early release?
You would think, but again, he might not be sure where he put the body. These cases happened in 1974, isn't it? That's been at least 40-something years. A lot's changed. A lot of the places we read about these cases, they used to be rural areas. Then they economized, buildings got put up everywhere. Nothing's exactly the same as what it was. So when you look at the area you buried a body, you might not be able to pick out exactly where you put it. Or, again, he's just trying to save face with his kids and maybe his family. You know, some people, they're just that narcissistic. They won't admit it even if, you know, maybe there's a payoff for them in it.
And in your experience, why do men like Lung tell their girlfriends what's going on and what they had done?
I think it serves as a two-pronged effect to make them look tough, number one, and to assert the same control in their second relationship as they did in the first one. You know, it's a thing like that. We've seen it in other cases we work, like Marcus Merritt. You know, you create an element of fear by telling them things that you've done to your spouse, even if they're not true, just because you want to maintain power in the relationship.
And do you think that Ed Lung thought he was going to get away with murder?
I think based on the staging he did, leaving his wife's car at the airport and saying she was missing, I think maybe he had an idea about how he was going to get away with it. In a lot of situations like this, you know, as you read these cases, you read the different things. One of them tried to put his wife's car at the airport. Another suspect tried to claim his wife was mentally unstable. So they're trying not only to create a narrative to save themselves, but I think it also makes them the victim for people to believe, you know, their wife took off on them with somebody else or ran away and left the kids. It gets them not only off the hook legally, but it gets them sympathy from friends and family members.
Okay. Now on to the next case. Catherine Runte, 28 years old, went missing on May 22nd, 1979. Do you think that Miss Runte took off on her own, or do you suspect foul play?
I suspect foul play, but that's just my nature. In a marriage, you can't necessarily say for sure. I mean, based on what you know about somebody's personality, you can have a good idea of whether or not they would have left. But, you know, from your past experiences of being married, that it is a very tenuous thing, and sometimes it just doesn't go the way they want. People do walk out. But, you know, it again goes back to when you ask me or even you, we'll most likely believe foul play because we're suspicious in nature.
And do you think that her husband was trying to lay down a defense that Catherine was always taking off and she wasn't mentally stable?
Yes, you see this all the time in domestic-related homicide. They try to lay the groundwork in every different way, saying that they took a trip here or went there, or they were hanging out with this person. But the problem with this is, as they spin these stories, usually they change. The details will go from, well, I don't know what happened, to, well, she was off here doing this. And those are pretty good indicators that usually some type of foul play or something is being covered up or something like that.
And do you think the home invasion played any part in her disappearance?
I'm not sure, based on what you know about this case, was there any, were they brought to trial, the home invaders?
No.
It didn't say anything
No,
about that in any of the files that I read.
Yeah, they weren't caught. And this was only, I guess, a few weeks before Catherine's disappearance.
Well, the only reason that I could see that they would go back is if she was going to maybe finger one of them in court. Otherwise, it would seem kind of risky and maybe even stupid to go back and attack a house, you know, a short time after something like that, because they're obviously going to be on their guard more after home invasion. You know, people get new locks, maybe a new security system, a really vicious Rottweiler, you know.
Okay. If you were in charge of the case and you had no evidence where to start looking, where would you start?
the way I would deal with a missing persons case, especially some like these, when we were talking about lung, where you find blood in the car, I would investigate it less like a missing persons case and more like a homicide case. Because I think when you investigate a homicide case, you're looking more for solid, concrete leads about what actually happened at the end of their life versus a missing persons case where I don't think they try as hard, not because necessarily they don't care, but because they're looking for smaller clues, maybe thinking the person was alive. But, you know, when you do that, you don't often get as much evidence as you would as if you start looking at it like a homicide and maybe start narrowing down suspects through, you know, circumstantial and physical evidence. What do you think about that?
Oh, yes, that's basically, you know, on the same line with, well, with your profiling and with the schooling we've taken. And, yeah, that all falls into that category. And, yeah, sometimes it's mind-boggling how these cases end up, and it's mind-boggling how a lot of these victims aren't recovered. And that's what I mean. There's so many missing persons in the United States alone that it's just mind-boggling.
I know it's unreal.
Pardon?
It's unreal. And see, I can understand part of it because, you know, a lot of people do have histories of being a chronic runaway, you know, and they've done it 3 and 4 times. And when their family files a police report, the police don't feel like going and looking for them at the bars for the time. But then you have a lot of people who it's just completely out of character that they would just entirely disappear from their families, especially people like Lung. If you look at her history, she's got 4 children. So, I mean, do you really think that she would just turn her back on them? And, you know.
Yeah. Okay, in regard to searching for the 28-year-old female, where would you start searching?
The 28-year-old female? Hard to say. She could be anywhere. You could search all the local hangouts. Obviously, I would search any bodies of water or large forested areas. There's drainage ditches. Sewers were more popular back in the old days because they weren't as bolted down. Now they kind of shut those so you don't have as easy access. But you got storm drains, waterways, heavily wooded areas. A lot of times in domestic homicides, you'll see they don't bury the victim close to their property, but if they have a relative who has property, like far away on a piece of farmland or rural area, I've seen several people do that. So it's just any number of places you could start looking.
And there's no activity on Catherine's Social Security number, her bank accounts, or her credit cards. As an investigator, what does that say to you?
She's dead.
Okay.
I mean, let's be honest. Most people don't go ghost unless they're trying to hide from somebody, especially for a number of years. I mean, the only type of people that do that are the type of people who work for the CIA. And let's face it, when it comes down to that at the end of the day, how many people actually do that? Less than probably 1%. So unless you were running from something real bad, you're not going to leave your purse and your belongings. And you see that all the time. I don't understand sometimes how police miss that as red flags. I know you probably see a lot too, where they'll leave their purse and their cell phone and their Social Security card. And it's like, how does this not scream out foul play to you when they leave behind their most personal and important possessions, especially with women, because anyone who's ever known any woman knows that they don't go anywhere without that purse. You know, that's...
Okay, on to the next case. Laura Ann Johnson, 24 years old, vanished without a trace on May 5, 1990, from Palatine, Illinois. Johnson left the bar called the Hobnob, accompanied by an unidentified white male. Witnesses said she had just met that evening. Do you think this man was involved in Mrs. Johnson's disappearance?
I don't know. Obviously, statistics would tell you the last person that sees someone alive is most likely the person who killed them. So we can only speculate that that's probably most likely the case.
Okay. And when you read that a female has went missing and left children behind, what is your first thought?
It's sad for everybody because I don't know how you feel about this, and you can chime in and tell me, but a lot of times it's sadder to have a family member go missing than be murdered, because at least when they're murdered, you can go to their burial site, visit their grave. When they're missing, that's just a hole that's in your life that's horrible, because you don't know where they are, if they're in danger, if they're not in danger, if they are in danger, could you help them? You know, it's just a cluster of emotions. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, how I feel about things, a good example is Marcus Merritt and his mother Royce. Royce contacted us at the prime time for us to get what she needed done. And I know, like I said, it's sad to say that, yes, if you had a family member who is missing, yes, there's a lot of avenues that plays into that, and as the years go by, there are families that will admit to you that they would rather had their child or their missing loved one murdered and located than just up and missing without a trace. So everybody's thinking is different. And like I said, Royce was very lucky when she contacted us at the time she did. And we've gotten some positive results, and we plan to get more. So
yeah, I'm so happy that we've got some positive results, because she's such a nice lady.
Oh yeah,
really, at every level.
Yeah. And do you think that this unidentified man is the guilty one, or do you think they parted ways and she met with foul play later?
I don't know. Again, there are no witnesses who said they saw her after she was picked up. Am I correct about that?
Yes. See, that's another thing. When they was observed leaving the bar together, there was a witness, but he couldn't tell if they got in the same vehicle because he lost sight of them in between the vehicles. And so that's what I mean.
I mean, the thinking from a profiler or investigator standpoint is that she probably had a little too much to drink that night at the bar. He offered her a ride home. Again, we go back to there was a sexual advance made. You know, they reject you, and then, bam, that's how foul play happens. But again, we can only speculate because no one identified the victim after she was last seen leaving the bar.
Okay, it seems funny.
Or at least nobody.
Pardon?
Or at least nobody that came forward. I'm sorry.
Yeah, nobody came forward if they did see anything. It seems funny that Mrs. Johnson's husband has made some conflicting statements. Why would you make a conflicting statement if there was already a suspect that police were looking for?
Again, it goes back to when you have a spouse that goes murdered or disappears, if you're guilty, you're going to have conflicting stories.
Okay.
But the truth is always easy to keep straight. You know what I'm saying? Any investigator will tell you if the story changes, especially a significant number of times. Now, I want to be fair because I don't know that it was this whole story and not just a few statements. But that could be an indicator of guilt, or that could just be an indicator that him and his spouse are having some problems and he doesn't know exactly what she's up to, you know. A lot of times they say communication is most important in marriage, and sometimes, you know, that's where it all falls apart, you know.
Okay. And Dan, do you have anything you would like to add about the Palatine 3?
Not specifically about the Palatine 3, but this just goes in general to everyone in a relationship. Because I've known a lot of people in iffy relationships, and I just want to say clearly, if you're in a relationship with somebody that treats you wrong or disrespects you or tries to own you, you don't need them, and you shouldn't feel that for any reason that you have to stay with somebody like that. And if you feel you're in a situation like that, contact a friend, a family member. There are shelters you could go to, but don't be staying in bad relationships where you fight and there's physical abuse. Because, you know, all it takes is one bad night where somebody drank too much, and then we end up sitting here talking about a case like this where they just mysteriously disappeared. So if you're in a bad relationship, remember, being in a relationship with somebody is supposed to make you happy, not miserable. Could you agree with that?
Oh, yes. Yes, I definitely agree with that. Yes. You know.
So if you're in a relationship with somebody that treats you not right, then obviously you need to get out of that situation just as fast as possible, because although it might seem easier to say, trust me, the longer you do, the harder it will be to make that break when the time comes. And believe me, I've known a lot of those people in my professional life and in my personal life. So just always remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, and never let anybody treat you any less.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for being on tonight's podcast. As always, it was a pleasure speaking with you. And let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, our guest will be Miss Cali. We'll be back with Miss Cali on the line. Welcome back to our MJ podcast. This is episode 16, part 1, the Palatine 3. Welcome, Cali, to our MJ podcast. How are you tonight?
I'm good, Mark. And yourself?
I'm just fine. And, Cali, when you read about cases like these 3 cases, do you find it strange that some men just don't believe in getting a divorce?
Well, there's a couple of things here that come into play, and that is that the fear and the loss of control is huge at that point in time. And actually the fear of the unknown, right? So I'm not trying to give them an excuse, but Yeah, that seems to be one of the common themes anyway.
Okay. And can you give our listeners an insight as to why these men would rather kill than get a divorce?
Well, they really don't have much control over themselves, so they're exercising it on the weaker sex. And these women are like possessions to these men. It may well be a learned behavior, like from their childhood, or something that they've grown up to believe works for them. And it would be exhibited by males in their lives while they were growing up anyway. And they're afraid also about losing everything and the material things. And the fear that they can't start over again. That will all have to, they'll all have to pay alimony or child support and not be able to live on what is left. What they don't realize is that they might not have been able to accumulate whatever it is they had thus far, and that they're afraid of losing it without the efforts of their spouse. So it's fairly half hers if she's worked with the person or even just behind the scenes working. I mean, there's a lot to that, you know?
And do you think in these cases that there is a pattern shown by the husband that a divorce is out of the question?
Oh, yes. You'll never live without me. There's these phrases that come to mind. If I can't have her, no one else will. I'm sure that many women have heard that. And there's proof that at the time of leaving, a relationship is the most dangerous time for whoever the person is who's been abusing. It's most dangerous for the person who has been being abused if there's abuse already involved. It isn't something that just happened at the time of a relationship breakup.
Okay.
It's been ongoing.
And when a husband is convicted of murdering his wife without the victim's body, why do you think 7 times out of 10 they won't give up the location of the body?
I'm not 100% sure, but I expect that somewhere in the back of their minds, they either think that without the body, they will eventually get off of the charges, but then there's also the possibility that it's their very last hold on that person, on the victim. And he has ownership over her body at that point in time. And not giving it up still keeps that ownership somehow. It's twisted, but...
And when you read that the missing victim left children behind, what is your first thought?
Oh, there's no way they do that willingly. I mean, it's not impossible for a woman to leave her husband and children, and like I have personally witnessed that one day. A grandmother, the kids came home downstairs, and I was there visiting my friend, and her nieces and nephews had come home from school, and her mother was home, and they lived upstairs, and the kids came home, and mommy wasn't there, and there was this piece of paper on the table, and the kids went running upstairs to grandma, and grandma read the note, and she had left her children, and her husband wasn't home from work yet. So unbeknownst to him, all this had happened. However, that's very unusual. It doesn't happen that often. Most mothers aren't going to leave their kids behind. And a lot of men who have, a lot of times when a woman has come to harm at the hands of her husband, and there's children left behind, he will use that. He'll say, oh, she just took off and left her kids. Well, no, she probably didn't.
And Miss Kelly, is there anything else you would like to add concerning the three victims, the Palatine Three?
Well, it's too bad, Mark, that after all the years that men and women have inhabited this earth, that they cannot seem to realize that we all have to get along or agree to disagree. Because there's really nowhere else to go. Like, we're here. Now, sometimes we have to walk away and do whatever we need to do to exist and start a new life. But we can't change or control another human being. The only one we can change or control is ourselves. And it's just too bad that people can't perceive that. They can't get it sometimes. And once again, you're probably going back to, my grandfather did it this way. My father did it this way. I've seen it at a dinner table. You're my wife. You know, you're going to do what I say you're going to do. And I was like in shock, because this was my nephew talking to his soon-to-be wife. And I'm like, whoa, how soon-to-be do you think she is? She might soon to be gone. Anyway, bottom line, yeah, the earth is only so big. And we're all on it. And to kill someone for what? It's just, there's no threat, but fear itself can bring out, fear equals anger. All fear, except for righteous fear, brings out that kind of anger that can cause your flash anger, or an anger that has become a habit. Okay. And in a relationship, that anger can become a habit.
Well, thank you, Miss Kelly, for being on tonight's podcast. We look forward to hearing from you soon. I have a quote for our listeners. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Alan W. Watts. Wow. I would like to thank our listeners for listening in tonight. Special thanks to our special guests, Dan and Miss Callie, for being on tonight's podcast. And always remember, folks, if you ever get bored with nothing to do, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised what you might find. That's the end of tonight's podcast. My name is Mark. I was your host for tonight's show. And good night from Plattsburgh, New York.
Begin.